Hello and thank you for joining the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. Masks off. The CDC mandate has been revoked by a federal judge in Florida. The change has been met with cheers and with some pushback. What does the new ruling mean for you? 23 people on the FBI's terror watch list have been caught illegally entering the United States. Those crossing the southern border are coming from countries all around the world, prompting the question, who's entering our country and is America less safe because of it? Former Texas Congressman and retired Lieutenant Colonel Allen West will join us to discuss. The White House, they're feeling the heat over expanding oil and gas leases on federal lands and now are desperate to message that they're dedicated to the climate change agenda. The administration today restoring environmental regulations that were relaxed under former President Trump. We'll unpack the details. If you took some form of public transportation today, you may have noticed less people wearing masks. That's because a federal judge struck down the CDC mask mandate for public transportation. Passengers cheered, whistled, and applauded. They threw away masks after the announcement. Several major airlines quickly dropped the mandate on Monday following the judge's ruling. Travelers' reactions were mixed.
I'm super excited.
I don't think masks are necessary.
I felt much more comfortable keeping mine on.
Today, when asked whether people should continue wearing masks, President Biden responded,
"That's up to them."
For now, the mandate for travel is officially over. However, local governments and travel organizations can still enforce their own regulations. The White House says agencies are reviewing next steps and may still appeal the court's decision. And ride service companies Uber and Lyft today announced that facial coverings are no longer mandatory in their vehicles. And the CDC has dropped all remaining countries from its top COVID-19 travel advisory warning. The agency said Monday it's removed about 90 destinations from its level 4 do not travel category. The decision came days after the CDC said the highest risk category will only be reserved for extreme scenarios. More than 100 countries, including Canada, the UK, and other popular European destinations, still have a level 3 advisory for a high COVID-19 warning. More Democrats are pushing back against President Biden's plan to end Title 42 next month. That includes Biden ally Senator Chris Coons. Coons said he hoped that the administration can reconsider the decision to lift Title 42.
My hope is that that will be reconsidered appropriately. I know that there are both Republicans and Democrats calling for a reconsideration.
Under Title 42, Border Patrol can deport illegal aliens quickly for public health reasons related to the pandemic. The Biden administration is terminating this Trump-era policy beginning May 23rd. Yet more Democrats are joining Republicans in opposing the move. Senator Gary Peters said that the plan to end Title 42 should be revisited and perhaps delayed. And 5 Democrat senators co-sponsored a bipartisan bill to temporarily block the lifting of Title 42. Border security is shaping up to take center stage in the upcoming midterm elections. This as lawmakers warn that rolling back Title 42 would have catastrophic consequences for the U.S. That is, in terms of both national security and domestic safety. Tens of thousands of illegal immigrants pass through the southern border undetected on a monthly basis. And some of those apprehended in recent months, many of those have been on the FBI's terrorist watch list. We spoke to former Texas Congressman and retired Lieutenant Colonel in the Army, Allen West. Here's what he had to say. Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Steve, and hopefully you had a blessed resurrection weekend.
You as well, and thank you. Lieutenant Colonel, the U.S. detained a record number of illegal immigrants on its southwest border last month, with arrest numbers reaching the highest point in 2 decades. What does it look like once Title 42 is lifted?
Well, once Title 42 is lifted, you'll see an explosion of those numbers. And the fact that we have just seen that record number above all the previous other record numbers means that the fact that Joe Biden and the Biden administration has announced lifting Title 42, you're already starting to see that flood. But not just the fact that we have this incredible boost in numbers, we also are finding out that we're getting more people that are on the terrorist watch list. As a matter of fact, the recent report has about 23 members of the terrorist watch list that were recently apprehended. The bottom line is that we see a Biden administration that is undermining the sovereignty of the United States of America, the sovereignty of the state of Texas, and really and truthfully, they're in violation of the Constitution, which is Article 4, Section 4, which says the federal government is supposed to provide to every state in the union protection from invasion. That's what's happening when you have millions that are coming across our border now.
Now, you're based out of Texas. You've spent quite a bit of time on the border. I've been there before with you. What is the morale of the Border Patrol right now?
Well, I think you've seen some of the video clips, and not just the Border Patrol, but also our Texas National Guard. They don't feel like they're doing their mission, their duties and responsibilities. As a matter of fact, all they're doing is corralling up these individuals and turning them over to a government-supported, non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Catholic Charities one. There's another one through the Lutheran Ministries program. And what they're doing, they're the ones that are processing these illegals, and then in turn, they get put on buses, planes, and other means by which they can leave the state of Texas and go elsewhere, or they are just funneled to other cities here in the state of Texas. And that's something that we have seen on many reports of these individuals showing up at these NGOs and then getting taxi cabs that are taking them wherever they seek to go.
Why do you think Democrats, including elected officials along the southern border, such as Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas, are breaking ranks with the vast majority within their party over this issue?
Well, I will tell you, hats off to Henry Cuellar. Served with him in Congress back some years ago, about a decade ago. And he is truly a conservative Democrat, what we used to call the old blue dogs. And he realizes that this is an important issue to his constituents. When you look at the drug trafficking crisis that we have, the human and sex trafficking crisis, Henry Cuellar is a representative from the state of Texas. And the state of Texas is the #1 state in the United States of America for human and sex trafficking. The top 2 cities in the country for sex trafficking, Houston and Dallas respectively, and nothing is being done. And so Henry Cuellar does not support this open borders policy, which the progressive socialist left has pushed upon the Biden administration. So hats off to him, and that's why he has a very far left challenger, and he's in a runoff against her coming up next month.
Just to put things into perspective, for those who don't follow this issue that closely and may think it's being hyper-politicized, the drugs, the cartels, the human trafficking, all of these issues that stem from the southern border, these things could be drastically reduced with some slight tweaking of policy. Is it as simple as that?
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, we saw the Remain in Mexico, which the Biden administration is refusing to adhere to, and many of the other things from the previous administration. We did not have this issue along our border. We had curtailed it. We were starting to construct a physical barrier, a border wall that would aid the efforts that we see down there with other means, electronic surveillance and things of that nature on the ground. But every city in the United States of America is a border city. Every county is a border county. And why do I say that? The #1 killer of Americans right now, 18 to 45, is fentanyl. Where does fentanyl come from? It comes from China. And it's shipped over to the transnational narco-criminal terrorist organizations that we call the cartels, who are really the ones in charge of all the border zones. The governors over there in Mexico, they're not in charge of anything. They take their orders from the cartels, or else they'll find themselves with their head sitting in their lap.
Former Texas Congressman, retired Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, thank you.
My pleasure.
The White House today announced they're restoring environmental regulations that will give the federal government a heavier hand over infrastructure projects in the name of fighting climate change. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more details.
The White House is feeling the heat for resuming oil and gas leasing on federal lands, which is contrary to its climate pledges. Now the administration is eager to send the message that they are still working to clean up the environment. One plan of action is imposing more federal regulations on infrastructure projects. Today, the White House finalized a rule to strengthen the National Environmental Policy Act. It would put projects like building highways, pipelines, and oil wells under the microscope for rigorous environmental reviews by the government. These regulations were peeled back under Trump to try to speed up building pipelines and infrastructure projects that he said would boost the economy and provide jobs. The Biden administration says reimposing what they call environmental safeguards will speed up the process for infrastructure projects. But critics say the regulations could slow things down. This new rule will soon be put to the test as states roll out new projects funded under the recently signed infrastructure law. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Have you ever wondered why big tech values your data more than you do? It's because they're poised to make billions from it, all while developing a profile of more than just your buying habits. Jane Hoffman, author of the new book, Your Data, Their Billions, joins us to discuss. The White House says it's considering additional sanctions on Russia. When are they coming, and is what's currently in place working? Former President Trump is injecting himself into the Russia-Ukraine conflict, urging the two countries to reach an agreement soon, warning severe casualties. But President Zelensky doesn't sound optimistic. What did they say? Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. The U.S. economy is in flux and experts are forecasting a possible recession. What might that mean for the tech industry moving forward, a sector that has shown remarkable strength in the markets? Well, our next guest wrote the book, Your Data, Their Billions, and explores one of the dark sides of big tech and how they're making billions from people like you and I without us even knowing it. Here's a look at our interview with author Jane Hoffman. Jane Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us on the Capital Report.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, there are multiple areas where people are pushing back on big tech. You have censorship, you have the effects that it has on children. Then one that you have to really, that you've dug deep into is in your book, is the issue of privacy. And how might one's privacy be at stake when it comes to all of these big tech companies?
Well, I think people have a different notion of privacy today. Privacy may mean something to me, but it might mean something very different to maybe a 15-year-old. And unfortunately, privacy is becoming a luxury good. So what's happened is your data, every time you type something in on your computer, you search for something, or you're on your phone, you're actually being tracked. You're leaving breadcrumbs and a trail so that you can be found because you're the product. That's how it works. You're the product. So nothing you do is private. There are about 2,000 bits of information that big tech has on you. Right now, nobody probably knows exactly where you are, what medications you take, your sexuality, what you buy online, but you know who knows? Big tech knows.
Wow, that's pretty scary. Now, are all of these companies, whether it's big tech, social media, credit card companies, etc., sharing data behind the scenes to establish these types of profiles on people?
All these companies are buying and selling your data. So it's shared, but there's a cost associated with it. So because it's your data, they're making billions off of it. So there's what's called a data broker. So every time you're doing something online, they're buying that piece of information. So say you want to buy snow boots. They know algorithmically people who want to buy snow boots are also looking for mittens, and they'll send you ads for mittens. And what's happened is we live in what's called a filter bubble. So you only see things that reinforce your current behavior. And politically, we may think of it as the splinternet rather than the internet, because people are being divided by their behavior and their online activities.
So you may have just answered this, but why is the data so important to them?
That's how they make their money. They make their money on advertising and selling the data. So they make their money not through a subscription model, but through owning your data and selling it. Now, if you're an EMT and you're having a heart attack, you want that data widely available so someone can save your life. But if the EMT is selling that data to a tabloid, you might not want that. We're spending about 4 hours and 23 minutes a day, a third of our day, on the phone. That's vastly different than 5 years ago. And what does this prognosticate for the future? Are we going to be just living in a metaverse, which is what Facebook would like, so that we're communicating to each other online with these personas that we create?
So it's about business now. Could this level of tracking and information lead to something much more totalitarian with a flip of the switch?
It could, depending on who that information is shared with. So you have to think really long and hard about how much you want your information online. I propose a couple of things. One thing I propose is kind of an NPR of Google that has no buying and selling of your data. I call it Oogle, and it would be like the PBS of search. So you wouldn't get ads, and you could search for things without your data being bought and sold.
Now, are we seeing anything in terms of that, totalitarian angle in countries that have a certain amount of advanced technology and infrastructure that have really been data focused, such as China? And how might they be using malevolently the data of their citizens?
Well, I think there's a different social contract in China than there is in the U.S. In the U.S., we have a different social contract. We have a sense of privacy. And in China, you have to assume that everything you do online, the government knows, and it's the government's business.
Jane Hoffman, author of Your Data, Their Billions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
More sanctions are coming. The White House says it's considering additional sanctions on Russia and that existing sanctions are having the desired impact.
So you will see us continue to expand our sanctions targets and to continue to take steps to both further tighten our sanctions to prevent evasion and put in place additional sanctions. Jen
Psaki says more action is expected in the coming days. She added that the existing sanctions are beginning to put the squeeze on the Russian economy. In addition, she says there are no plans for President Biden to visit Ukraine, despite President Zelensky's request. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the war in Ukraine is making food insecurity around the world even worse.
War has made an already dire situation worse. Price and supply shocks are already materializing, adding to global inflationary pressures, creating risks to external balances, and undermining the recovery from the pandemic.
Yellen's comments came Tuesday in Washington during the annual spring meetings for the International Monetary Fund and World Bank Group. The growing crisis over food insecurity and skyrocketing food prices is taking center stage at the meeting. As Russian forces launch a new offensive along Ukraine's eastern flank, former President Donald Trump is calling on Russia and Ukraine to reach an agreement to end the war. In a statement on Monday, Trump said it doesn't make sense that Russia and Ukraine are not sitting down and working out some kind of agreement. He added that there will be nothing left but death, destruction, and carnage if an agreement is not reached soon. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Zelensky said Sunday that he's prepared to speak with Russia, but wouldn't do so under a Russian ultimatum. He added that talking so far has been unsuccessful and that the chances for holding talks is decreasing daily. A federal judge ruled that a group's challenge to Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's candidacy in the state of Georgia in this year's elections will be able to proceed. The lawsuit is using a rarely invoked constitutional clause. The lawsuit claims the Congresswoman engaged in a supposed insurrection against the U.S. government in the January 6th Capitol breach of the U.S. Capitol building. Greene represents Georgia's 14th congressional district and is an outspoken supporter of former President Donald Trump. The rarely invoked disqualification clause was enacted in the wake of the Civil War to keep former Confederates out of Congress. According to the New York Times, Greene's attorney describes the ruling as flawed. He also says Greene publicly and vigorously condemned the attack on the Capitol. Greene vigorously denies the claims against her and argues that the state law governing election challenges is unconstitutional because it shifts the burden of proof from the accuser to the accused. The facts surrounding the Capitol breach have been slow to emerge. Most recently, one January 6th defendant's case was dismissed when video emerged of the defendant being allowed into the Capitol building without any forced entry. That's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Don't forget to visit us at ntd.com/Capitol Report to stay up to date on all of our latest interviews and reports. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.